Hey, founders, welcome back to another episode of the Gab Lab. So great to have you here. This is a show that's designed to bring you financial intelligence that won't only just blow your mind, but it's there to help you build your bottom line as well. I'm your show host, Tanya Woods Richardson, and today's episode is brought to you by our good friends at Community Future Sunrise. Okay, so today in the lab, we have nailed the number pro, Yvonne Thévenot. She's an independent consultant and change management expert. She's going to be talking to us about change management, what it is, and as founders, why we should care, and its impact to our bottom line. But then she's also going to walk us through two areas that she believes have really significantly been impacted as a result of COVID, and that is the customer experience, as well as operational efficiencies and effectiveness. So with that being said, this is one episode you don't want to miss. Go grab a coffee, and we'll see you in the lab. Well, Yvonne, thank you so much for taking the time for joining us in the Gab Lab today. I am really excited to actually dive in to the topic of change management. We've had a little bit of a conversation on change management in the past, and it boggles my mind, actually, this whole idea of change management, how many small business owners are actually going through change on a day-to-day basis, but haven't really branded it or labeled it change management. I think they're used to labeling it fires. Yeah. I do it that fire and that fire. So I'm thrilled that you're making the time to join us today in the Gab Lab to talk a little bit about change management and COVID specifically, how that has impacted our day-to-day. So maybe because it isn't a term many founders are overly familiar with, maybe if you could walk us through what change management is from the perspective of a small business owner.
Absolutely. Change management is a space that I have been personally involved in since about 2007. And I think, like many founders, I was practicing it in business for many years and didn't really have a label for it. And it's as simple as you're doing something today, you want to do something different tomorrow, you want your employees to do something different tomorrow, you want your clients to do something different tomorrow, and how do you get them from A to B in the most efficient and effective way possible? So for a founder, for a business owner, every day that you spent mucking about in a new platform, training people on a new way of doing an operational task, you're losing money or you're not making as much money as you potentially could. So change management really comes down to shortening that cycle, shortening that window, and being able to gain the benefit of that change you've introduced absolutely as quickly as possible.
Okay. So I'm hearing a lot in that, and I'm wondering if I can dissect that a little bit just so I can wrap my head around it. And I suspect many founders are asking this as well. So when we first start our business, we obviously write out a business plan. And that whole business plan is really this deliberate intention of how we plan to go from here to here. And in that plan, we write out a SWOT analysis, right? Our strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. I'm wondering, change management, is it really, and maybe you can speak to this in your experience, but for business owners, how much are they actually reacting to change versus how much are they actually taking a proactive approach to what needs to happen and how that's going to get them to that end goal?
That's such a great question because there's a number of factors that play into that. First is the nature of the business itself. So some businesses are inherently subject to more change at a moment's notice than others. So definitely those founders, especially if they're new to the business, may find themselves back on the heels because regulatory changes or new guidance from the government, those kinds of things impact them day in, day out. Another thing is the actual founder's personality, okay? A number of founders love the juice that comes from trying something new and diving in and, making it work and troubleshooting it. So in fact, this concept of a planful approach to something while conceptually and intellectually they want to be there, when it actually comes time to running their business, they love that feeling of solving problems. And so, in fact, might avoid change management because that sort of takes some of the fun out of it. There's also an aspect of where the business is in its life cycle. So, absolutely, when a business is in its early days, everything is changing all the time. And so the ability to be planful about it or the time to be planful about it just simply might not be there. When an organization then transitions a bit into a space where it can be a little bit more mature, then people do tend to think about, okay, how can I make this change, introduce this change, adopt a new accounting software, perhaps fine tune a process in the plant, and do it in a way that is less reactionary. So that's also a great time when change management can play a role. Absolutely, today, one of the key times is when they go through renewal. And renewal can be sparked internally, take on a new business line, perhaps create a new product group, or externally impacted change like COVID. And so those are times when taking a moment's pause, thinking about your organization, where you are today, where you want it to be and play in the future, and being planful about it can really enhance your time to market and your ability to stabilize and gain the revenues and benefits out of that change.
Wow. And so, yes, I think you're right. I think with many founders, I like to call us, myself being one of them, the butterfly chasers, right? It's always like, what's new, what's exciting? We go, go, go. We tend to react to things. And so now I'm hearing in what you're saying that from a change management perspective, looking at internally what might be happening or what might be on the horizon, and then externally what we can potentially foresee happening, or situations like COVID. And then it's this matter of, okay, it's time to kind of regroup, figure out what we can do now, what we can actually plan to do in the future. Out of curiosity, and I think you've already alluded to this a little bit, but the impact of not planning for change to the best of our ability. We're never going to get it,
Right.
100%, but to not plan for that, because that's kind of how we're predispositioned as founders, is to always just go and be thinking, about all these shiny little things that are distracting us from the strategy of building the business. But in your experience, what has the cost of that been to the bottom line when we're not planning for change? How does that impact our profitability?
If I think about profitability being the triangle supported by customer, employee, and financial based tactics. So if you're going to annoy a bunch of customers because you put a change in place, but you didn't think about the 1-800 number you would need to answer their questions, that's a change and a risk to the bottom line. If you put a change in place and you haven't adequately informed or trained your employees, and they get disgruntled or leave the organization or become inert as a result, that is an impact to your bottom line. And then direct financial components, which is either losing margin or creating undue cost for yourself because you're kind of doing some rework, or perhaps sometimes if you're addressing customer issues, then you're compensating for lag times and you're adjusting pricing. So a bottom line impact in context of customer, employee, and financial all lead to that overall bottom line driver of why change management is so important. Change management helps you take a moment's pause and think ahead to what might happen, what could happen, and what do I want to do about it. In some cases, a founder may say, I don't have the resources to actually address that. That's fine, but you're doing it as a conscious decision, just like you make trade-off decisions in your business every single day.
Okay. No, that definitely makes sense. And I'm wondering then for the founders that are listening in, how, and this is going to be a loaded question. I know in our next segments, we actually start addressing change management from a customer service perspective, right? And then as well as from a operational efficiency. These are two discussion points because this is what you've been seeing through COVID, two areas that have been most impacted. But how how would I, as a founder, actually go about the process of sitting down to try to figure out my change management strategy? Where do I start with that?
So there's a number of tools. You can Google change management and you'll come up with a million tools that can help
Okay.
you guide in the process. But similar to the way you have experts at your reach, your accountant, your lawyer, people who really know things that at a depth of level that you don't and nor do you care to, and drawing those experts in at the right moments in time. There's always a range of service that can be associated with it. But a recent experience, I had a client reach out and I coached them through a change. So all we did was set up a weekly discussion when for a period of time through about 90 days, and would ask them questions. Okay, did you think about this? How did you approach this? Are you incorporating this? And did they drive tactics based on every single thing we talked about? No. But they knew that after that hour a week, they would spend time thinking about their business in a different way, making different decisions because of the potential bottom line impact. And often, I know you use the phrase blow your mind. It's like, oh, wow, I didn't even think about that. Where will they call? What is the 1-800 number or link on my website that I want them to tap into as a result of that change?
Okay, so in there, I'm hearing surround yourself with experts, surround
Yes.
yourself with people who can help you see the forest through the trees, that you don't need to go it alone, right? I also heard in that then almost a dual edged approach where part of it is planning, but then also getting the support to then help execute on the change as well. So getting that dual edged support in the proactive versus the reactive. And you'd agree with that?
Absolutely. And change, people don't act as we always think they're going to act. The way they respond to a change is not, has some predictability to it, but also has some unpredictability to it. So similar to just the general running of a business, you plan and then you have space to allow yourself to adjust. And change is a particular time when that is really, really critical. You take a look, you maybe use data feedback to be able to interpret the impacts of the change, and then you go, okay, that really seemed to work. Not so sure that did. So let's tweak it a bit. What might be different? Do we need to communicate more? Do we need to train differently? How can we approach this in a way that actually we can keep the core of the change intact, but tweak it around the edges to make it even more effective?
Okay. And I'm wondering, in the work that you do, I would imagine that change, when it happens, it not only is it's not only how we respond to internal or external environments, but I imagine that when we're actually proactively planning for change management, we're also thinking about the impact on the internal and the external environment. It's like we have to take both approaches or look at strategies to deal with both of those aspects in the business. Is that
Yeah,
right?
it is. To whenever someone goes to market in a different way, there are the things that they expect to happen, and then there's the unintended consequences.
Heavily weighted on one side, I think, more so than the other. But yes.
And those unintended consequences, or the holy smokes moments, it's like, holy smokes, didn't expect that to happen. Um, those are the times when people react in different ways. Founders react in different ways. Okay, forget about it. This is seeming like too much work. Or inertia, right? Oh my, like, now what do I do?
Right.
Or, well, try this, try this, try this. So reacting like in little chunks. Again, that moment's pause. Okay, so why is this happening? Trying to understand it, planfully attacking it, or sometimes letting it lie. There is always noise that comes out of any change. And one of the factors when I work with clients right up front is, so how much noise are you prepared to expect, or uh, prepared to accept? And well, no noise. Okay, never going to happen. If that's your expectation, we need to stop conversation right now. Okay, this much noise, that much noise. This is how we'll measure it. This is how we'll assess it. How big is the noise and how much is the noise? How much is it draining me from my business as usual activities? And so then once that approach is determined and decided, well, that's when you can help guide that activity reacting in the moment. It's like, remember we talked about this, that there would be noise. Is this now at a level where you want to address it? Or do we just kind of hold our breath for another week or so and see what happens then?
Oh, so smart. And I think this is where the value of having those discussions in advance come in, right? Because then you don't feel blindsided. And it's usually in those blindsided moments that we tend to be extremely reactionary, right? Instead of kind of holding the line to see if this is one of those situations that we do need to be reacting to. So let me know if I've got this, if I'm encapsulating this information correctly here. So the first thing that kind of comes to mind for me when I think about the conversation that we've just had is that the fluidity in business, that there's always going to be change. We're not going to get away from that. So just to expect it. So then to that point, to actually pull the plan together as best as we can, to look at potentially internal situations, external situations that might be coming down the pipe, right? To foresee to the best of our ability to those pieces, and then to put together a plan of action that would best respond to those, I don't want to say eventualities, but respond to those situations should they come up. The other thing that I love about what you're suggesting when it comes to the expertise and having that person there, and I'm sure that, or maybe you could speak to this later on in one of our other segments, but engaging with the change management expert, where I see there being so much value in that, especially for founders, is because many of us don't tend to plan things out, that when things do happen, we do become quite reactionary, to your point about the noise. And when we've got that expert to actually weigh in with, this is where we can go through that list to say, is this actually something that you want to take action on right now? Is it one of the top priorities? Yes or no? Because I think we get bogged down as founders thinking everything's a top priority.
Yeah.
And this is where sage advice from consultants come in saying, it might not be the first thing that we need to address. Do you see that quite regularly working with small business owners?
Yes, and I understand it. I mean, I truly understand it in my own practice as well. It's very natural to want something to exhibit that vision of greatness, whether it's a new product or a new approach, that vision that you've got in your mind. And so you kind of lean in and become immersed by that and keep trying to move towards that. The truth is that not everything requires action, and not everything requires action today. And so being able to help someone take a breath, have a sounding board, often hear themselves say it out loud, and assess, okay, how important is that really? Is that impacting the revenue stream that you're expecting? Is there an immediate change that can be made? If not, maybe you just need to live with it right now, and helping them see that that's okay too.
Beautiful. Beautiful. Last question for Yvonne in this segment. As you're speaking to all of this, what would you recommend be a best practice, a healthy practice for a founder? Is this something that we should be looking at monthly, quarterly? Does it depend on size of business, or is it just intuitively, if we were just to look at this once a week, to just keep our finger on the pulse of what's actually happening in the business? What's your recommendation on frequency of looking at our business with this lens?
I would say there's three key elements that would contribute to wanting to take a step back and consider this. The first is as part of the annual planning cycle and being able to think about, okay, where am I investing, divesting next year? Where am I expecting my growth to come? And that's a great time to say, okay, if that's where I'm going to focus, therefore, then what? What needs to change as a result? So that is a great crossroads to be able to do that. Another would be as a specific change is being planned. So that might be the actual implementation of that new accounting software. It might be the purchase of that additional piece of equipment, and taking that moment's pause to say, okay, what else is it that is going to be impacted that maybe I'm just focused on, wow, I'm going to have this new piece of equipment and forgot that my shed isn't quite that tall. So those kinds of things that as a change is happening. And then the third would be as a result, and lots of business owners take a moment's pause at a quarter, the quarter's review. And being able to say, did the quarter turn out the way I thought it would? Did I get as many new clients or as much business from the existing clients that I thought I would? And that is also a great time to take that financial information that is such a milestone, and then be able to say, okay, perhaps now I need to inject change. I need to create a different stimulation for my sales force. I need to consider the time for scaling or expansion as a result of actually generating more change to achieve the desired business outcomes.
That's so powerful, Yvonne, because it parallels, doesn't it, with kind of this financial assessment that we should ideally be taking, these pauses to be taking in our business to see, are we on plan? Are we not on plan? What do we need to adjust? How do we adjust it? And then to your point too, then of then understanding the financial costs and consequences of adopting new change, a new piece of equipment. Does that require a new storage shed? Does it require more maintenance? And making sure all of those numbers come back into our financials, and again, planning for that net profit. We're always talking about planning for sales, but making sure that that intention for that profitability and increased value in the business is still there. Thank you. That's such a great and powerful point to actually land on here at the end of our first point. Thank you for that. All right, so this will wrap up our first segment, Yvonne. For those of you that are listening or watching in, we have two more segments to cover here with Yvonne. Thank you again for sharing your expertise with us. We're actually going to move into content that's a little bit more directed or specific to the impact that COVID has had on small businesses. So thank you, Yvonne. We're going to come back for part two, where we're actually going to look at COVID and the impact on the customer experience and how to better plan for change in the future for that. So thanks again for joining us here for our first part of this episode. And we'll see you back in the lab for part two.